Hello and welcome. Today we'll be going over the continuous residence and physical presence requirements for filing Form N-400, the application for naturalization for the United States citizenship. The continuous residence and physical presence requirements can be a point of confusion for many permanent residents when applying for U.S. citizenship through naturalization. Many permanent residents visit family and friends in their home countries by traveling for extended periods and returning to the United States. So it is important to understand how long absences from the United States can affect eligibility for filing the N-400. Okay, but why is this so important? Because basically the continuous residence and physical presence requirements serve to prove that you have not abandoned your U.S. residence and that you genuinely want to become a citizen. So by spending too much time abroad, you signal to USCIS that you may not be fully committed to permanent residence in the United States and also may not be eligible for U.S. citizenship. So the requirements are in place to help ensure that the U.S. is accepting citizens that want to fully integrate and become a part of American life. All right, so the continuous residence explained. Continuous residence means that the applicant has maintained residence, a living space, a living abode, within the United States for a specified period of time. So generally, you must have 5 years of continuous residence in the U.S. to become eligible for naturalized citizenship. However, if you are married to a U.S. citizen, the requirement is 3 years of continuous residence, and there's an exception if the spouse is a battered spouse. But travel outside the United States can disrupt your continuous residence. So generally speaking, I always say generally because there are exceptions to a lot of, many things in this whole application process. So, but generally speaking, for the purposes of naturalization, you should avoid any trips abroad of 6 months or longer. A trip abroad that is less than 6 months will not disrupt continuous residence. Okay? A trip of more than 6 months, but less than 1 year, is presumed to break your continuous residence. I'll talk about that in a second. And a trip 12 months or longer will definitely break your continuous residence. And I'll talk about that as well. So, an absence between 6 months and 1 year is presumed to disrupt the continuity of residence. That's why many permanent residents limit their individual trips outside the United States to 1 to 5 months at a time. Now, if you have gone beyond the 6 months, here are some tips for overcoming a presumption that you disrupted the continuous residency. It is possible to overcome this presumption and successfully apply for naturalization. But you need to provide evidence to establish that you did not disrupt your residence and that you continue to maintain strong ties in the United States. So according to USCIS, the evidence may include, but is not limited to, documentation that during the absence you did not terminate your employment in the United States or obtain employment while abroad, that your immediate family remained in the United States, and you retained full access to your United States abode, to your residence or your home. Some other items that prove ties to the U.S. So again, if you've been abroad for a prolonged period and you need to have evidence of an intention to return, this is what they're looking for, an intention to return to the U.S. You need to have this intention during the entirety of your stay abroad. So during your whole trip. USCIS will consider the strength of your ties in the U.S. versus your ties abroad to see if the ties are strong enough to infer that you've planned throughout your trip to return to the U.S. So, for example, where do you own or rent property? If you own or rent property in the U.S., do you have access to it? And are your belongings in it? Or have you rented it out to somebody else? Where do you work or go to school? Where do your close relatives live? Where do you keep your key assets like your bank accounts, your credit card accounts, cars, insurance? Do you file income taxes each year in the U.S.? More on that in a sec. Do you have a valid U.S. driver's license? Have you studied English while abroad? It shows your intention that you will be coming back. Okay, so now a note about the taxes. Failure to file. It is very important that LPRs, legal permanent residents, required by law to file U.S. income tax returns do so while abroad, even if they are not employed by U.S. companies, because failure to file returns may indicate abandonment. LPRs are normally required to file tax returns indicating worldwide income, not just U.S. income. Payment of back taxes later would be weak evidence of continued U.S. residence. Also, filing as a non-resident is a big no-no. It is very important that LPRs identify themselves as U.S. residents on tax returns and not as non-residents. If an individual files U.S. tax returns identifying himself or herself as a non-resident, abandonment of LPR status may be found based on this voluntary admission of non-residency. Okay? All right, now let's go into absences of 1 year or more. Now, in most cases, an absence from the United States for a continuous period of 1 year or more during the period for which continuous residence is required will break the continuity of residence. This applies whether the absence takes place prior to or after filing the naturalization application. So if you plan on being absent from the United States for an extended period of time, it is advisable, strongly advisable, to first apply for a reentry permit on Form I-131. It's the application for travel documents. Okay, if you do not obtain a reentry permit, lengthy or frequent absences from the United States could be factors supporting a conclusion that you have abandoned your lawful permanent resident status. So please get that. Also, you might be eligible to file Form N-470, the application to preserve residence for naturalization purposes, if you are a lawful permanent resident who must leave the United States for a period of 1 year or longer for certain employment purposes. And of course, there's a list of exact, eligible employment organizations and government agencies that you would use this form instead of the Form I-131. Okay? All right, so please, if you remain outside of the United States for more than 2 years, any reentry permit granted before your departure from the United States will have expired. In this case, it is advisable to consider applying for a returning resident visa at the nearest U.S. embassy or consulate. Okay? So you want to make sure you have these things in place before traveling abroad for too long. Okay. In conclusion here, if you have an absence of greater than 6 months and you want to apply for naturalization, I highly advise you to consult with an immigration lawyer first to make sure that they can properly analyze your specific situation and advise you how to proceed. So you want to make sure that you don't want to go through this whole process and then have them deny you because of a long absence, because of a break in continuancy of residence. All right, so that's half of it. The other half is the physical presence. Physical presence means that the applicant has been physically present within the United States for a specified period of time over the previous 5 years. Okay, so the continuous residence is like breaks in your residence. The physical presence means that you've been within the United States for a certain amount of time. And generally, within that 5 years, you must have 30 months of physical presence in the U.S. to become eligible for naturalized citizenship. Okay? And if you're married to a U.S. citizen, this is over a 3-year period, and you're required to have 18 months of physical presence. All right, in addition, applicants are required to show that they have resided for at least 3 months immediately preceding the filing of Form N-400 in the USCIS district or state where the applicant claims to have residency. Okay, so please don't move states and then after 1 month file. Okay, you need to live in that place for at least 3 months. Right, that goes along with the physical presence. Okay, so basically physical presence is a cumulative requirement. You must combine each day that you were outside the United States. You're going to write them all down and you're going to add them up. If you have been absent from the U.S. for too long, you won't be able to apply for naturalization. To resolve this problem, you got to remain in the United States. After a few months, then recalculate your time outside the U.S. Okay, add it all up and continue until you get that 30 months for 5 years, 18 months for 3 years minimum. Okay, and of course there are exceptions, but this is all generally speaking. Now, how to determine continuous residence and physical presence? Your time as a permanent resident generally begins the day you were granted permanent resident status. So more accurately, a person is considered to be a permanent resident at the time USCIS approves the applicant's adjustment application or at the time the applicant enters and is admitted into the United States with an immigrant visa. The date can be found on your green card next to resident since. Okay, and of course, again, generally speaking, because certain classifications like refugee, a parolee, asylee, the effective date of becoming a permanent resident may be a date that is actually earlier than the actual approval of the status. So these become very specific to your own case. Okay, so here we see some green cards, and you can see the resident since date on them. And quick note here, you should renew your green card if your card is either expired or will expire within the next 6 months. Or apply for citizenship as soon as you are eligible, as soon as you can, and you're eligible. And before your green card has less than 6 months before expiration. Okay, that would be the best case, to just go ahead and apply for citizenship if you're eligible, if you're able to do it monetary wise, and your green card has, still has a couple years or even 8 months left on it. It's much better to do that. All right, and that's all for today. Please leave your questions and comments below, and I will do my best to get you some answers. Thank you.